When I was in high school, way back when, I gave my life to Jesus and changed my life. And although I was new in the faith, I was growing and I was searching for what God had for me. And one of the big events that I used to grow my faith was every week this big church in town had these Christian concerts on Saturday night. Every Saturday night. And I would go and hear great music that would draw me closer. But afterwards, the pastor would get up and he would give a message, and he would have an altar call. And an altar call is when people would come forward to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior at that moment. And so one day I'm sitting there and the message is over. He invites people to come. And as in every week, they'd be 50, 100 teenagers or young adults coming forward to give their life to Jesus. It was amazing. And that one day I'm looking up and I see this girl from my high school. Her name was Dawn Pickering. And she was the girl on campus. Every male in the school, their heart would beat a little faster when she would walk by. She was the cheerleader, of course. She was way out of my league. She was about 2 years older than me, but everyone knew who she was. And here she was giving her life to Jesus. And I was excited. And that next week at school, all the friends were talking about, did you see Dawn Pickering gave her life to Jesus? Wow. The next Sunday, or next Saturday night, they had a concert, a message, the altar call, and I look up, and there's Dawn Pickering again. And I said, well, maybe she just wanted to be sure. The next week, concert, message, altar call, and there she is again. And I just don't get it. Why does she keep coming up? The fourth week in a row, when I saw her come up, I just said, I have to ask someone. So I went and asked my youth pastor. I said, what's going on? This girl. And I told him the whole story. And he just said, well, there's people like that who live their whole week living for the devil. And on the weekend, they think they just want to come and live for Jesus that one day. And I said, well, you can't do that, can you? He said, no, you can't do that. When you decide to follow Jesus, you're all in. And this girl hadn't figured it out yet. Because here's a truth that we want to talk about this morning. Our behavior, whatever that is, good, bad, or ugly, points to what we believe in. Does that make sense? If we have true faith, that should begin to change the way we're acting. And it hadn't taken root in this woman yet. It was barely taken root in me. We claim to have faith, but we're scared to put it into practice. Why is it so scary? We're scared because maybe our friends at school or our co-workers at work or our neighbors will look at us kind of funny if we don't cuss anymore or we don't do the things that we used to do, that we're being changed. And so we continue to live in our past even though we should be set free. We're continuing this sermon series. It's called Freedom from Captivity. And we're looking at these Old Testament characters who found themselves captive because of either their own sin or the sins of somebody else. And we started off by talking about this man named Joseph, who was the son of Jacob. And now we started, this is our third week, talking about Daniel. Daniel was kidnapped as a teenager by the Babylonians, and he was carried off as a slave from Jerusalem to Babylon. And he was put in bondage. But God was with Daniel and a few of his friends. And they actually rose to have some power and authority in that kingdom. Today we are in Daniel chapter 3, and the title is Stand Up for What You Believe In. As we look at Daniel 3, I just want you to look for 4 things to remember, for you to remember. As you follow Jesus, 4 things to remember, 4 things to put into practice in your life, 4 things to assure yourself as you follow Jesus. So we're going to go through these. The first one is faith is not a feeling. Faith is not a feeling. And although I didn't know this girl from my high school well at all, she probably didn't even know my name. But I have a feeling she thought that faith was a feeling. And every week she had to come back to that Christian concert to get that feeling again, so she thinks she might have her sins forgiven. And I just hope that someone sat down with her one day and explained the gospel to her more deeply. After first service, Troy Love said, "So, do you ever hear from Don Pickering again?" I said, No, but that really makes me wonder if I, through social media or something, trying to track her down and to see, did she ever really give her life to Jesus? It'd be so fascinating to know. Well, last week, if you were here, we were outside on the grass last week. I'm glad it's not today, because we would have been rained out. Did you know in all the years we've had outdoor services, God has held back the rain every single time. And we're trusting that that's going to continue as we finish up this summer. But last week we were out in the grass, and we talked about Daniel chapter 2. And Daniel chapter 2, remember, there was this miracle that happened in King Nebuchadnezzar's life. And at the end of chapter 2, here's what he says to Daniel. Daniel 2:47. He says, "Daniel, your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings." And so last week I asked everybody, do you think Nebuchadnezzar really had faith? Or was it just a feeling at the moment when he saw this big miracle? Do you think Nebuchadnezzar really had faith? And I said last week, next week you'll find out. Well, here we go. We'll find out if Nebuchadnezzar really had faith. Chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. What does that mean? Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, made a false god, an idol, and he made it out of gold. Why would he do that? Because he didn't understand that we have a one true God who's living and active. His words are sharper than a double-edged sword. So he made this image, and I'm wondering, because in chapter 2 of Daniel, he had a dream about a statue. Could it be that this image was he was recreating his dream and putting this statue in there? Or was it a statue of himself? The Bible doesn't say. But what it does say is it was a false idol made out of gold. And it wasn't just some small little thing you'd put on your coffee table. It was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. And he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. 90 feet high. Do you know how tall that is? I started thinking, what could I compare it to? And here's the closest thing I came up to. Have you ever seen a picture of Christ the Redeemer in Brazil? Have you ever seen this statue? You know how tall Jesus is? 98 feet. That means Nebuchadnezzar's idol was just 8 feet shorter than that. That is huge. But because Nebuchadnezzar, I'll just be the, spoil the moment. He wasn't a believer yet. He put up this idol, probably of himself, and he wanted people to worship him. But there's a problem with idols. There's a prophet in the Old Testament named Isaiah. And Isaiah 44, here's what Isaiah says about these idols. 44:6, it says, "This is what the Lord says, Israel's King and Redeemer, the Lord Almighty. I am the first and the last. Apart from me, there is no God." That's what God's saying about himself. There's no such thing as little idols. I am the one and only God. Verse 9. "All who make idols are nothing, and the things they treasure are worthless." Verse 12. "The blacksmith takes a tool and works it in the coals. He shapes an idol with hammers. He forges it with the might of his arm. He gets hungry and loses his strength. He drinks no water and grows faint." What is Isaiah saying? The blacksmith is the one who's making your God. And he's making it and he's exhausted because it's hard work to make an idol. Verse 14 and 15. "He cuts down cedars. It is man's fuel for burning. He kindles a fire and bakes bread. But he also fashions a god and worships it. He makes an idol and bows down to it." Isaiah's saying, do you see how ridiculous this is? You're worshiping something that you carved yourself? Verses 17 and 18. "He prays to it and says, 'Save me, you are my God.' They know nothing, they understand nothing." That is what Nebuchadnezzar has brought to his country. He had an opportunity to bring truth because he saw the power of the one true God. And yet now he makes an idol. And what is he going to do with it? Verse 5. Daniel 3, verse 5 and 6. "As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." Not only did King Nebuchadnezzar make an idol, he is forcing the entire country to worship it. Verse 6. "Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." How's that for worship? Think that would increase church attendance? I think it might. But the problem is, it's all false. It's all false. I'm just thinking about this. We're not so different, though, are we? I mean, we bow down to a lot of things and don't think twice about it. We bow down to popularity. We want to be accepted by our friends, by our co-workers, by our neighbors. So we don't want to put on our "I love Jesus" face because they might think we're weird. So we bow down to popularity. We bow down for money. We want money, so we do things to get it that we probably shouldn't do. We bow down to sex. We bow down to substance abuse. And a big one is we bow down to pride. What is pride? Pride is putting yourself first. That's what Nebuchadnezzar is doing. Verse 8 and then verse 12. "At this time, some astrologers came to the king and denounced the Jews." In verse 12, what happened? "There are some Jews whom you have set over affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king." They pay no attention to you. "They neither serve your gods, nor do they worship the image of gold you have set up." So there's one of the leaders is like the tattletale. Everyone's worshiping you except these Jews over here. And he's getting Nebuchadnezzar all riled up. what Nebuchadnezzar needs to be reminded, and what we need to be reminded in point number 2, is that our God saves. Our God saves. Our God is the only way to salvation. So let me ask you before we go on, when culture knocks at your door, when culture encourages you to be someone you're not, in hopes that you're accepted, in hopes that you feel good, how do you respond? How do you respond? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood up against the call of culture. God wants us to stand out. Now, how do you stand out in a crowd? By doing the right thing. Morality shines brighter than conformity. So we stand up for what we believe in. Verse 13. Furious with rage. Why is Nebuchadnezzar so mad? Because somebody dare defied him. It's that pride that's riling up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Now it's interesting. King Nebuchadnezzar is going to ask these 3 men some questions, but notice how he words it. He uses the word my twice and the word I twice. It's all about Nebuchadnezzar. You ever known anyone who's just all about them? This is Nebuchadnezzar. Here's what he said. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" You notice that? Nebuchadnezzar has a serious pride problem. I think it's so interesting, this last sentence he said, "What God will be able to rescue you." Nebuchadnezzar forgot about God's miraculous power. He forgot about it. If you remember from last week, Nebuchadnezzar were having these troubling dreams. So he called in all the magicians and the astrologers from his court, and he said, "Tell me this dream I had, and then interpret it." And these guys said, "We can't tell you what you dreamed. You tell me what you dreamed, and I'll interpret it." He said, "No. Just to make sure you guys aren't tricking me, you tell me what I dreamed." And they said, "It's impossible, King. No one can do that." And the king said, "Okay, I'm going to kill all of you." And then Daniel said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, wait up, wait up, wait up. I'm going to ask my God to tell me what the dream was." And Daniel went to his friends and they prayed, and God gave Daniel the dream. It was about this big statue. And Nebuchadnezzar, we thought, was changed. We thought he was changed, but he forgot about the miraculous power of God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, point number 3, are going to remember they need to stand firm. They can't waver in their faith. They need to stand firm. And here's how they respond. Verse 16. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we need not defend ourselves before you in this matter." Why not? Why don't they put on a big trial and see if they're guilty or not? No, because they are guilty. They aren't going to worship these idols. So we don't need to defend ourselves. And then they go on and say this: "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from his hand. Do you see what they said? They said, if you throw us in, the God we serve, the one true God, the God that you forgot about, he is able to rescue us. We need to remember that. That when we start walking through the valley of the shadow of death, we need to be reminded that God is with us. He is going to help us. He is going to support us. But then look what they say in the next verse. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you've set up. Even if he does not. Do you hear what that means? That means, king, if you throw us in, our God is able to save us. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to worship your idols. Think about the things that you pray to God for, that he would intervene in your health, that he might bring healing to a loved one. And we trust that God will move, that trust that God will provide for us financially. We trust that God will help us in our marriages and our relationships. But even if he doesn't, will we still serve him? I tell you, that is next level discipleship. It's when your faith grows so strong that you trust God, that even if things do not work out miraculously, you still hang on to him. You know what I think about? I think about all those moms and dads in Texas whose kids are missing, washed away, and how they're praying that they might be found alive. But even if they're not, will they still hang on and love Jesus? That is so tough. But for every single one of us in this room, a time is coming when we are going to go through very difficult things. Maybe it's with our bad health. Maybe it's with a loved one's bad health. Maybe it's with something else. Will you trust Jesus even if it goes wrong? We need to stand firm in our faith. And that's why we gather on Sundays for church, isn't it? It's not that we have such amazing worship music. It's not that we teach from the Bible. But it's that we have a church family. We're surrounded with other believers who, when things start to go bad, they will huddle around us, pray for us, and hold us up, even in the really hard, nasty times. Do we know that? And if you've shown up a few times on Sunday but aren't connected, people might not even know that you need help. You have to connect. You have to meet people. We need to learn never to trade God, never to trade what we know about God for what we don't understand about this life. Does that make sense? Don't trade what we know about God for this unexplainable circumstances that come our way. We trust God no matter what. We trust him no matter what. Verse 19. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. That's how crazy mad Nebuchadnezzar is. And commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, what a bummer for these soldiers, right? They tie them up and they get a little too close to the furnace and they die. And when they drop dead, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go, whoops, and they fall in. Not looking good, right? But what they knew and what we need to be reminded of is that Jesus will never leave us. God will never leave Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Jesus will never leave us. Verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? Why is he amazed? Because God's miraculous. And we should be amazed. Those of us who follow Jesus, every morning when we see the sun rise up, we should say, thank you for your faithfulness, God. And every evening when it sets, thank you for another day. We should be amazed every day, whether it's a hard day or a good day. When we see friends and family, we should be amazed that God has brought those into our lives. This weekend, Christine and I, we had 4 grandkids with us. 4 miracles. They're miracles. How in the world? We should be thankful and amazed at what God does for us. Nebuchadnezzar continues, verse 25. He says, look, I see 4 men walking around the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Wow. Who is this 4th man in the fire? Who is it? Well, the Old Testament talk about this 4th person, not only in this story, but in other stories in the Old Testament. This person is known as the angel of the Lord. But those of us who follow Jesus, we know that this is the pre-incarnate Christ. What does that mean? It means 600 years ago from that day, Jesus was born in a stable. But before he took on human flesh, he reigned in heaven. And he would come down and assist us poor feeble humans sometimes. And this is the time. He goes down and he meets those 3 men in the fire. No matter where you go, God is with you. So why does God let this happen? Why does God let bad things happen to good people? Why? Well, God allows this broken world to carry on. And broken people sometimes make our lives miserable. But he uses these hard times to strengthen us. Here's what James chapter 1, verses 2 to 3 says. It says, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kind, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. When we go through hard times, we get stronger. That is a proof that God's at work in your hands. He's at work in your lives when your faith is growing. Verse 26. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. Verse 27. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. These 3 men go into the fire, they don't even get the smell of smoke on them. But the only thing that burned up were their ropes that they were tied up in. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants." They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. So let me ask you again. Does Nebuchadnezzar believe? These words are strong words. It sure seems like he might believe. But we find the final answer next week as we look at chapter 4 of Daniel. He's going to have to go through some nasty experiences. But our God is faithful. Verse 29. "Therefore I decree," says Nebuchadnezzar, "that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Nebuchadnezzar makes this decree, but is he even going to live up to it? We'll see. And I think it's pretty fascinating that this nation of Babylon, they didn't keep this decree as we look at even modern history. The Jewish people are still tormented by that same nation. This morning, we're going to conclude the service by celebrating communion. It's an opportunity where we get to remember Jesus, his faithfulness. So I encourage you, let's just bow our heads and let's